Growing up on the REZ, my uncle once told me that we need to kill our pets right away if they ever spoke, that they curse you if you don't. Have any of you ever heard this? Or something along those lines? I don't hear this quite often, and not just with your own pets. More like any animal that ends up talking. A speaking animal. Well, I have something to share. But before you even say anything, I want to say this is the reason why we don't speak to outsiders about certain things, even to other indigenous people belonging to different tribes. Why? Because there's still so much to learn, and we shouldn't judge another culture when we don't understand their ways yet. So many people don't even know one word of their own people's language, culture, or beliefs, yet they want to talk about one's own teachings. But anyways, that's a story for a different day. This is why in my tribe, we're familiar with the following teaching. Always be careful with what you say, because a little bird can take your own words to town. I'm gonna stay anonymous, and I'll say what tribe or where I'm from, because you know how people can be. So I grew up on the REZ. Well, mainly me. I'm the only child, over the summers at least. I guess I didn't really grow up on the REZ, but over the summers my parents would drop me off with my cousins, with my uncle and auntie, and I would stay with them for a few months. This would happen every summer. They had a small trailer home out in the open, but all around us was nothing but trees and brush. It wasn't so bad. You would often hear the birds, the different critters, but once the sun started going down, it always got quiet out there. The kind of quiet that makes you just want to stay inside. It was strange out there as well. Something strange would happen every summer that I went. I think the land itself was strange or something. Everything was strange up there. It was loud during the day, quiet at night. So the yard was full of patches of grass missing here and there, with everything else consisting of dirt. A few old cars parked out front that didn't run no more, that my uncle always kept. Somehow he always promised to work on them, but they had been there so long that they became part of the place. I saw them every summer, and I would ask him about them, and he always said he was in the process of restoring them. And a few yards in front, there was a big pole that my uncle would hang certain banners, flags, or other things. They also had a small shed. It was out in the back, but we didn't go there much unless we had to. And no, this isn't a story about a haunted shed. Anyways, this one summer, the last summer there, I was outside playing with my cousins. I was a bit older than them, even though I was a teenager, when out of nowhere, this random dog shows up. I swear, it happened out of nowhere. But the thing looked off from the start. Its mouth was long and wide. At least it looked like it was always smiling. I assumed it was a different dog breed that I hadn't seen. But the way it smiled, it seemed really creepy. Something about it didn't sit right with me. But when my uncle saw it, the dog quickly ran to him and started playing. I guess the poor dog hadn't seen anybody in so long. Out there, stray dogs were common. Sometimes dogs wandered off from other homes around the REZ, and eventually the dogs found themselves into someone's home. So of course my uncle took them in, just like everything else in this property. And well, for a while, the dog just stayed around, sleeping outside, laying down in the shade, and my uncle and aunt would sometimes feed it. It was real friendly, always following us when we walked around outside. As much as I said it was creepy, we did start getting along. But just as we started, everything went south, as you all like to say. One evening, I was taking out the trash. It wasn't fully dark yet, but it was starting to. I stepped outside through the front, but the dumpster for the trash was in the back of the trailer, so I had to walk around. As I was walking, I swear I heard someone singing coming from the back. Now remember I told you that at night everything got quiet? That was the strange part. Nowadays you hear crickets chirping and different critters at night. But over here, literally everything got quiet. So when I heard it, it startled me. It sounded like a woman's voice, soft, almost like somebody was humming. I thought that maybe it was my auntie, but as I hit the corner of the trailer to get to the back, the humming stopped. and I didn't see anybody. Well, alright, maybe it was her and she went through the opposite side. As I threw the trash in, I turned around. All I saw was that damn dog sitting there, staring at me. It wasn't wagging its tail or moving. It was literally just sitting there, looking at me. It was sitting down the way I came, so fuck that. I left it alone and went back inside, but through the opposite side. Good thing this dog was an outdoor dog at this point. So that night, you might guess what happened next. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that humming sound, except this time, it was by my window. At first I thought it was just the wind. Not sure if you have ever left the window a bit cracked or something, but it sounds like a whistle when air is finding its way through. But then I really listened and it changed from what sounded like humming to like whimpering, like somebody was crying. Eventually it stopped, and I guess I fell asleep because the next day I told my auntie about it, and it turns out they also ended up hearing it. Everyone was kind of uneasy, which made it worse because if your family gets quiet about something like that, you know it's not good. And mind you, we were supposed to have a ceremony the next day. So that morning, I was helping my auntie cook breakfast. My uncle and cousins were outside setting up the tent in the back, where the ceremony was going to be conducted. I figured I would take them some coffee, or see if they need anything. As I stepped outside, I glanced up at the post that I told you about that was in front, just out of habit, and that's when I saw it. A big ass owl sitting right up there, staring down at me. My stomach dropped. Everyone knows what that means, especially around here. I froze for a second, then picked up some rocks and started throwing them at it. And that's when I noticed it had an earring hanging off its ear. I ran back inside and told my auntie what I saw. That's when she asked me where everyone else was at, and I said they're in the back right now. So she basically almost dragged me outside with her. When we stepped out, it was still there. So we went to the back of the trailer where my uncle was at. My auntie told my uncle what was going on, and just like that, my uncle grabbed a nearby stick or a branch or something, and then he ran around to the front, swinging and shouting, "You don't belong here. I know what you are." And not to mention, he was shouting all of this in our native language. That's when the dog also came from the back, running, barking and growling towards it. And then the owl finally took off. But as it did, it started to let out this low, ugly cackle. It sounded like it was laughing, mocking us. My uncle stood quiet for a moment, still keeping his eyes out there. Then he turned to us, and I won't forget what he said. "From now on, we're gonna keep our eyes open. Things like that don't just show up for no reason." He looked over at my auntie and gave her a slight nod, and then he told her to get everything ready. He then said, "Once we're done setting up the tent in the back, we are going to cleanse." Nothing else happened after that. But that night, everything changed. I remember laying there, staring at the ceiling, listening as something had woken me up again. At first it was quiet. Then, I swear I heard some humming again. Maybe it was singing. Soft, almost far away. It sounded like someone was whispering, just outside. I didn't even dare to look outside the window. Fuck, at this point I turned around instead. I mean, they always tell you not to pay attention to these things, right? Don't acknowledge it. Anything that you see or hear. And if you do see or hear something, so best believe that's exactly what I did. This is why I will never understand people who say in the movies, "Let's go investigate what that noise was." You know, in the scary movies. I can't remember what happened, but I ended up falling back asleep. The next morning, I woke up to loud voices outside, a whole commotion going on. I got up and looked out, and it was my auntie. She was yelling at my uncle. She was almost in tears, I could tell, but she kept telling him, "We need to get rid of that dog. I saw it last night. It was outside our window, but it wasn't even right. It was smiling." The dog was sitting there a few feet away, staring at them, calm, almost like it knew what was being said, just watching. My uncle didn't say anything. He was just standing there quiet. Then he finally said, "Alright," without saying anything else. He ended up grabbing the dog, put it into the truck, and drove off. That morning, while helping with breakfast, my uncle came back. When he walked in, he told me and my cousins that Shelly was no longer going to be around. And that's that. We didn't even say anything back. And yes, we had named the dog by now. Later that afternoon, while getting everything ready for the ceremony that was going to be done, we were all outside, and out of nowhere, far out in the distance, was Shelly. One of my younger cousins was like, "Hey, Shelly is back." When my uncle heard him say this, his face completely changed, but not of fear. I could see he was pissed off. The dog was sitting out there, far in the distance, just sitting. My uncle went up to it, grabbed it, put it into the truck, and told us that he would be right back to finish prepping everything. We didn't even say anything. Whenever things like this happen out here, my auntie always told us not to talk about these things, especially as they're happening. I remember it wasn't even like 10 minutes when we heard him pulling up into the yard again. I remember he didn't say anything but ran inside. We all went inside with him, nosy as kids, of course. As we walked in, I remember him telling my auntie. The dog started laughing at me, so I ended up slitting its throat. We were shocked. Well, not me. One of my cousins let out a gasp, and my uncle told us to mind our business and get back to work. He closed the door and basically locked us outside. We were outside until my uncle came out, and he told us to come back in. He didn't say anything about the dog or nothing. I just didn't like how sometimes things don't get talked about. But hey, again, keep your mouth shut, right? We figured that if we need to know, they would tell us. Later that night, my uncle told all of us to go change and get ready for the ceremony. As we all got together in the living room, my uncle had sent my cousins outside to go start a fire, when suddenly, they came running back inside. One of my cousins' face was pale. He said that Shelly was back, standing right outside the tent. We all went to look through one of the windows, and sure enough, there it was, that same dog. That's when my uncle told us not to come outside, that he would be right back. He grabbed his gun and went outside. We saw him through the window. He walked up to the dog as the dog simply sat there. My uncle aimed his gun right at the dog's head. He waited about 5 to 10 seconds, and then he shot it. He then covered the eyes of the dog with a cloth or something, but he left it out there. He came back inside and told all of us to come with him. That's when he told all of us in front of the dog, "This was no dog. This is bad medicine. It wore the skin of one, but it wasn't one." He then said he was going to take it far away from here, that he was going to go burn the body, then bury the remains with cedar or something, to say a few prayers, because when something like this happens, it carries bad energy. It will stick around. However, what I won't forget before he left was when he told all of us, if an animal ever speaks to you, you kill it. That's exactly what I did with this wannabe dog here. I never did find out what was going on out there. A bunch of other creepy things happened that I won't ever tell you about, simply because you might call me crazy, or you might just not believe me. Even when I tell other indigenous people about this, some of them just don't believe it. That was the last summer I went. I didn't go back. My parents actually didn't let me go again. I guess because of what I told them what was going on. I still kept in touch with them. However, the subject, the things that happened, never get brought up. And now we all kind of went separate ways, especially when me and my family moved down south. I do wonder what was going on, which is why I'm sharing this with you. Do y'all have any idea what my uncle and his family were dealing with? Please let me know if you or somebody else, maybe somebody in your own family, has ever gone through something like this. Thanks for listening. Out here on the REZ, being safe doesn't just come from locking your doors. It comes from who you let into your home. You see, something that we teach out here on the REZ is that spirits, especially dark ones, or other things, they can attach themselves to people who are walking down a road that they shouldn't be, or doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. And if you're not careful, if you spend too much time around somebody who's doing those things, whatever is following them might just start following you. This happened during my senior year of high school. My best friend was kicked out of her home and didn't have anywhere to go, so my parents let her live with us. I had a smaller bed, so she had to sleep in the same bedroom with my sister that was next to mine. Everything was good for a while until I heard the noises from my closet one night. And this always happened during the night when we were all asleep. The first few nights, it sounded as if a mouse was digging in the closet. I would get up, turn on the light, open the closet door, and there was nothing. My dad set some mouse traps in the closet thinking we would catch the little thing. Nothing was ever caught. Just about a week or so later, the noise grew louder, but this time it sounded like a human was digging through stuff in the closet. This is what started to freak me out. I got up, did the same thing, turned on the light, opened the closet, and nothing out of place. I do remember that an elder once told me that if you have something that belongs to somebody who has passed on, that was not gifted to you, they could come back and look for it. So I looked through my closet and everything was mine, so I know it couldn't be that. This went on for a couple of nights until I couldn't take it. I told my dad. He didn't really believe me at first. He still thought it was a mouse. I did try telling him that the noise was way too loud for a mouse to be making, so we swapped beds for a night. He slept in my room, and I ended up sleeping with my mom. It was the first time I slept good in a while. The next morning, my dad comes rolling out of my room looking sleep deprived. He finally believed me, so he ended up smudging the whole house. Everything was good for a few weeks, until one night I was asleep, and whatever it was back, and it was even more loud. It freaked me out. I screamed for my dad. He came running in. As soon as he opened the door, the noise stopped, so we opened the closet. Same as always, nothing was misplaced. He ended up visiting one of his spiritual friends that ended up telling him that I had to tell the unwanted spirit that it was not welcome in my room and that it needed to leave. Well, it came back again. At this point I was fed up, almost angry. I was a teenager who was sleep deprived and so sick of it that I didn't even want to talk to it. So I yelled at it to leave my fucking room and be gone. That was the worst thing that I could have done at that time. Whatever it was, threw my closet door open and started knocking all around my room, circling with the knocks over and over. I couldn't see a shadow or anything. I just heard the loud knocks. I screamed. My dad came. Once again, when he opened the door, it stopped. He ended up smudging again. Everything was good for a while, until one night, I was sleeping. I would always keep the bathroom light on. My room was right next to it, so I could have some light shining into my room from underneath the door. Well, before this night, my dad would walk through the house and would walk to my room to check on me. It was always on random nights, and I would hear his footsteps coming whenever he would do it. Well, this night, I thought I heard my dad walking through the house. I could hear the footsteps coming closer to my room. I looked at the foot of the door and I saw a shadow, as if it was my dad at the door, ready to open it. But he didn't open the door. The door handle just jiggled. The footsteps then moved into the bathroom, and then whatever it was started scratching at the wall, where I was on the other side of it. That's when I fucking screamed. My dad came running in, and nothing was there. Nothing else happened after that. But the next day, my dad went back to his friend. He gave him something to smudge with. I don't remember exactly what it was. Then he also had somebody bless the inside and outside of the house. Things were good. My friend reconciled with her mom, and she moved back home. I didn't have anything else happen after that. It was gone. I was finally able to have some sleep. We did end up visiting my dad's friend. He said that he believes a dark spirit had attached itself to my friend because of the life that she lives. She's had a rough upbringing and has done some negative things to herself. He believes that the spirit loves to feed off of negative things, and it tried to test me as well. He also said that they always try to lead somebody off the right path. It does creep me out whenever I tell this story. It's something that I'll never forget. I do wonder if it was going to end up doing something to me, or if my friend continued to live with it. It still makes me shiver when I think about it. I do want to say that it never bothered my sister. As a matter of fact, she had no idea this was going on until I told her. I guess maybe it was trying to attach itself to me somehow. Thank you for allowing me to share with you. Have a good night. I'm an 18-year-old from California. Last year in 2023, I decided to go on a solo one-night camping trip on a secluded trail. My plan was to go early and hike all day through beautiful forested mountains until I went off trail and set up camp for the night. The next day I would finish the hike and get picked up by my family, where the trail would end on a dirt road. I had been on this trail before with my father and knew it very well. It's not really marked on the map, which is why I like hiking it. Normally I wouldn't go by myself camping out in the woods, but I was feeling old enough and brave enough to attempt it. I also knew that the chances of seeing somebody else was close to zero, as I hadn't seen a single other person hiking it before, even in daytime. I chose this trail because I wanted to camp out into this region, but camping there isn't allowed by the Park Service. So by choosing this trail, there was a little chance that I got caught and would get busted by some other hikers. And for this reason, I chose not to start a fire and instead used a propane cooker. My dad dropped me off at the trailhead. I was ready. I had 3 knives on me, a whistle for mountain lions, and a lot of experience in the area, and enjoyed myself until I came to my predetermined camp spot off the trail. I set up my tent, had dinner over my stove, and tucked in for bed. I woke up in the middle of the night, well, suddenly. At first I didn't hear anything and thought I woke up randomly. I waited a few moments laying up with my eyes open. Then I heard a twig break not far from my tent. I didn't panic immediately as I thought it could be a deer or a raccoon. I was going to make a noise to scare it off, but before I did, I heard 2 steps pressing on the pine needles and twigs. My heart began racing as it sounded like a human walking. Keep in mind, I am off the trail in a place where I hadn't seen anybody before. I reached over to my side where I had my buck knife. I heard the walking come towards my tent, but not directly. Then it stopped. I was terrified, but I kept silent. Even if I wanted to yell, I felt like I couldn't. Then I heard what only confirmed my fears. The thing outside my tent began to hum. There was no doubt it was a person. I gripped my knife knowing that was all I had to defend myself. The humming continued, but I stayed completely silent, hoping that they would just leave. It kept going for what felt like minutes until the person stopped and began walking away from my tent. I then heard scratching on one of the trees near my campsite before I heard them dash away, creating a huge commotion of grass, pine needles, and branches breaking. Needless to say, I didn't fall asleep after that, and I stayed up all night clutching my knife. In the morning when the sun had come up, I didn't hear anything else. I got up and quickly began packing my things to make a mad dash for the end of the trail. At this point I was running, just looking back. I ended up at the dirt road by noon, and I called my family to pick me up. They did, and I told them the whole story. To this day I haven't gone back on that trail, and I made the difficult choice not to inform the authorities, as I couldn't pin anyone to a crime, and it would mean that I would have to admit that I illegally camped in that area. I recently decided to head back to the area with my father on a shorter hike to show him. We saw trash and evidence of a person living out in those woods, which was now abandoned. It was creepy, because it really wasn't far from where I was at the first time, meaning that I most likely was never alone when I camped there. I swear, I'm not scared of something supernatural coming out for me in the woods. I'm more scared of humans. So I want to share this story to get some of your opinions. A while back, 9 to 10 years ago, I was staying down in the REZ at my grandma's house. At this time, a lot of my family was down, and some of you know how grandma's house is. There was a lot of people staying there, so there was nowhere for me to sleep, and I wasn't going to sleep on the ground with no blankets or pillow. So I called my mom and said if she could come get me. She answered, and of course, me being a mama's boy, she came and picked me up. We were heading out, and out here on this REZ, when you leave, you're heading out this curved road, then a straight path to the highway. So right before we get to the highway, there's this little building that we call the Tribal Affairs Building, and you can basically see the front and the back of this building. Well, in the back is where they keep this big ass green dumpster. While me and my mom were driving by, we saw this furry looking animal, or dog, or something, digging in the trash. Let me remind you, those green dumpsters are pretty tall. I would say at least 5 to 6 feet off the ground. And whatever this thing was, it was just leaning on the dumpster, digging through it. My first reaction was to believe it was some sort of crusty REZ dog looking for food. Then, my mom slowed down and we both were looking at it. As soon as she slowed down, I think it knew that we were looking at it. Next thing to happen, this dog-like thing peered up at us with 2 eyes that reflected off the headlights, and it had a dog face and was at least 3 feet taller than the dumpster. As soon as we saw that thing watching us drive by, we ended up screaming like hell. My mom ended up hauling ass onto the highway. This still gives me chills to this very day. So if anybody's seen a crusty tall REZ dog running around, let me know. God damn it, not again, screamed Ricky after opening the much anticipated email. Pinche pendejo, he said even louder. Hijo de tu puta madre. He picked up his expensive mouse and threw it against the wall. Bésame el pinche culo, puto. He slammed his fist down, shattering the tricked out top of the line gaming keyboard. Ricky continued to stare at the message, the words mocking him from his computer screen. The message was topped with a large header and white font that stood in contrast to the black background. Right there, the 2 hated words that said, "Story delete." Ricky is all too familiar with these words. In fact, he should be able to recite the entire message from memory by now. Your story has been deleted because it doesn't meet the quality standards. If you feel like it did meet the standards, please state your case on the appeal. Make sure you follow the instructions to the letter there, or your appeal will be automatically denied. Do not attempt to re-upload your story. If you upload again, you'll receive a 1-day ban from editing, as per the rules. Ricky loves scary stories. He comes from a culture rich in the history of the supernatural. The only thing he loves more than scary stories is writing scary stories. Sadly, there is one problem. How do I put this? Well, the truth of the matter is, our friend Ricky here is, for lack of better words, a shitty writer. There's zero talent in this poor boy's head, and the same can be said about his imagination. His characters have no substance, his grammar is horrible, his plot developments are non-existent, and his word choices are, might I say, infantile. What is truly sad about this whole ordeal is that Ricky truly believes his stories are good. No, he thinks that they're great. The dark and sinister forces that inhabit the worlds that he creates are far more superior to anything seen in a movie, or even found on the internet, or so he believes. His dark tales are capable of tapping into the pools of terror, buried deep within our subconscious minds. That's what he expects his readers to find from every one of his works. whereas you and I would see it for what it really is. Some have even gone as far as to say that his stories are so bad, looking at the words for too long will give you pink eye. One boy claimed that after being forced to listen from beginning to end, Ricky's story gave him an ear infection. Ricky doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't like rejection, and he already has it in his head that they are not even reading his stories. He's convinced they don't even bother to give him the time of day and just delete them. Everything builds up, and his cheeks turn red as he screams out loud, "Why wouldn't they listen to me? They never even gave me a chance." He knows this to be true, especially in consideration of how they treat him and what they say about his stories. He reads every comment. Bad grammar. But I'm new to this site. Can you not just tell me what to fix or fix it yourself? A lot of misspelled words, but it's the way my character speaks. Very poorly written and awkward sentences. Well, English isn't my first language, so just give me a chance. The story is not creepy. What do you mean it's not creepy? There's a fucking witch in the story. How's that not scary? You see, Ricky is a spoiled kid from a well-to-do family. His ungrateful heart has never been denied a single demand. There was nothing he could not have in his pampered life. With such a lifestyle, he also never had a dream or aspire for greater things. Despite its value, all the objects of his desire were carelessly tossed to the side or forgotten when interest was lost. They meant nothing to him, and eventually, Ricky turned that frustration outwards upon those who were weaker and less capable of standing up for themselves. For every insult, every slight, and every time he did not get what he wanted, he inflicted that rage back upon the innocent. But tonight, that's all gonna change. That's why I've been sent. That is my charge from La Dama. Tonight, I will reveal to him the stories of his people and enlighten him about where he comes from. I'll bring knowledge under cover of night and carry revelation on the tip of my tongue. With his last breath, he will learn this final lesson. Thou shalt not suffer the cries of a spoiled child. So when the boy lays his head upon his pillow and closes his eyes to sleep, he will be unaware of the small leather pouch tucked every so carefully beneath him. It will call out to her. It will summon her, and she will come. She will drink, even though her thirst for revenge can never be quenched. She will feed her hate, though its hunger can never be satisfied. But to understand the events that are going to come to pass, we must look to the past. Know this, the more days that go by, the more things stay the same. Long ago, the people of Mexico suffered from the deeds of corrupt men, and they had to suffer through the true rulers of the land, the cartels. While savages and brutality swept across the plains and darkened the skies like a cloud of locusts, a small village in the city of Mexico prospered, untouched by the evils of man. In those days, the villages were weak. They couldn't defend themselves against the powerful and corrupt man, infected with the sickness of greed. Government and town officials lined their pockets with the sweat and blood of the poor. No justice or protection ever came for the people. Farmers' crops were plundered and destroyed. Workers were kept in constant poverty. Their sons would be taken against their will to replenish the numbers. It was the daughters of Mexico who suffered the most. Many mothers and fathers could only mourn before a single lit candle, for there was not a body to bury for the funeral. They would live their lives knowing what became of their beloved child. Too many shadow graves sprinkled the countryside with the bones from unnamed girls. Among this violence, all but one village suffered, those of questionable character and darkness in their hearts. They wouldn't enter the borders of this town, for its people were under the care and protection of a powerful curandera. Her name was known from afar, and her magic was strong. The evil man knew this to be true, and they would not risk her wrath upon them. This ate away at their egos, and soon they began to plot among themselves, in secret, in darkened rooms. They planned to get rid of this woman. Early one morning, the curandera awoke to the sound of a child's cry. It was not a cry of terror, but a cry of pain. She ran out of her small house to see a boy sitting on the dirt path that ran alongside her home. Next to him was an old bike. Hitched to one of the wheels was a weather cart, carrying a large wooden box. He sat crying on the ground, clutching both his arm and leg. Even from a distance, she could see the two painful welts upon the boy's skin. The curandera knew what happened, and she took a glass jar of something from off her shelf. She went out to the boy and warmly said, "¿Qué pasa, mijo? What's the matter, little boy?" Alright, so this happened after we moved into our new place. Always be careful of the places you move into. It's one thing I learned after what happened to my family. We moved into this place which was like a duplex. How it started was with my little one hearing growling in his room. He would come tell me. I found that strange and thought that maybe it was just his TV was left on. As time went by, I started to wake up with bruises and scratches. They would always be in threes. We would also sometimes see shadows. One morning, my husband saw someone go into the washroom. He thought it was one of our girls, so he waited at the kitchen table for them to come out. He heard water running for the longest time and no one came out. So he got up and no one was in the washroom, but the sink was running. Another thing we noticed was that all my children's behaviors slowly started to change. My older one started to become angry, and my second would stay in her room and became closed off. And my youngest would say that she saw a little boy playing in our living room. One night, when my husband was gone, I was in my room. All of a sudden, I heard banging in our kitchen, so I got up to look. All our drawers and cupboard doors were open, so naturally, I closed them and had this eerie feeling like someone was watching, especially coming from the staircase coming up to our kitchen. It started off with things like that, and also banging on our door, which no one was ever there when we would look out the window to see who it might be. Things gradually got worse. One morning, my husband and I were getting ready. He was sitting at the edge of the bed when I looked. It was like he got pushed off the bed onto the floor. He looked like he was having some sort of seizure or something. I went to him. He looked at me. He said he felt like somebody had pushed him, and that something had him, and had a hard time fighting to let him go. The next morning we were getting ready again. He went to the washroom. I was in the room digging in the drawer. I saw someone standing at our bedroom door. I was looking up, about to say something because I thought it was my husband, and no one was there. He was still in the washroom. I brushed it off, and he came back. I closed the drawer, got up, went to the washroom, did my thing, and came back. My husband then tells me that after I left, the drawer opened after I shut it. I then told him I saw something standing at the bedroom door when he was in the washroom. After that, he would sometimes say that he was starting to feel like he was going to pass out. There were times when I had to hold him up. It was like the same thing was going to happen, like when he got pushed off the bed in our room. Then one day, we were going up the stairs just getting home. He was behind me talking, and then he just got quiet. I didn't hear him talking behind me anymore, so I turned around, and he was hunched over by the window, not moving. I walked back down the stairs, calling his name, but he wasn't moving at all. I held his face in my hands and looked at him, saying his name, asking if he was okay. He opened his eyes, and they were all white. I just hugged him and said his name over and over. I kept asking if he was okay. Then he said, "What happened?" I told him, and he simply said, "Let's go upstairs." We went to sit at the table and talked about what happened. He said he just remembered following me up the stairs talking, but that was it. I told him I didn't like what was happening, especially to him, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So I did some phone calls and texting around. I got a medicine person to come to our place the next day to bless our place and doctor my husband. This is when it was confirmed we had something in our place, and she said I left when she started praying and smudging. After that, our home felt better.
We also had the church come pray from room to room, and as they were leaving, our neighbors downstairs got them to pray for them in their place, because apparently weird things were happening there as well. Things went okay for the next few days. We went about our business. We were coming home. We went upstairs, then went out for fresh air. And as we were standing by the door talking, my husband said, "Alright, let's go upstairs." So we were going up again, and I didn't hear him coming behind me. I looked back, and he was standing by the door this time, with his head down. I then said, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer me, so I kept asking him. Then I was standing in front of him, talking to him, and hugged him again, asking him, "Are you okay? Talk to me." That's when he looked up, and his eyes were all white again. Except this time, there was an evil smirk on his face. So I started yelling for my young adult son, who was upstairs. He wasn't answering or coming, but my youngest son heard me. I then told him to go get his big brother, so he then came, and I told him, "Go get my bundle." So he did. He came and ran it down to me. I pulled out my rattle, and I started shaking it on my husband's chest, telling the thing that was inside my husband to leave. That's when it started coming towards me closer. So I started walking up the stairs backwards, and I kept saying, "Get out of his body." Then it laughed at me, and it was also saying something, but its voice was so low, I couldn't hear it, and thank God that I couldn't, because I wouldn't want to know what it said. It grabbed my rattle. It tried breaking it. I was scared, but at the same time, I didn't want to show it. I could tell it got angry. It grabbed my rattle and started doing what I was doing, almost mocking me. So I put my face right in front of him, and I told him, "This is my home, my house, and you are not welcome here, and I'm not scared of you." And I yelled for it to leave us alone. Then, that's when it turned around real fast and went running out of the house. I was so worried about my husband that I went running out trying to find him, but it was like he vanished. I then called a friend. I told her what happened, and she came over right away. Then my husband called. He said he didn't know where he was at, and then he noticed he was on Silkirk Avenue, and that he was throwing up like crazy. We went back and packed up our kids and some of our things. We left to stay in a hotel. The next day we got someone to come again to smudge and pray again, but this time she said it was going to stay away for a while, but it was just going to come back again. Then she started asking if we found any sand or bells whenever we first moved in. My husband said that he had found a bell. She then told us someone who was there before us had used black magic, and because of the things surrounding the place, it was just going to keep coming back. We were also told there were portals in my daughter's bedroom closet, and in our closet, and in the stairs where that thing kept jumping into my husband. So we packed up and left to stay in a hotel and started looking for a different place. But we had noticed my husband was starting to get sick again. And so we went to go see our pastor. Him and some of the elders performed a blessing, praying. Just as I pulled out my rattles, that's when he looked at me with the most evil eyes. The pastor then told me to move away from my husband, and as I did so, his eyes stayed on me, looking at me full of hate, without taking its eyes off of me. We then all started to pray. Our pastor started to pray his way, and my daughter and I with my rattles. As we started, my husband started getting sick, throwing up to the point that he fell over and started shaking like he was having a seizure again. Once we were done, he said he felt lighter and at peace. Later on, I also smudged him. I fanned him down and said a prayer. Never in a million years have I ever thought anything like this could happen to our family. And this stuff is real, not only just something that you see in a movie. I know I'm gonna get a lot of pushback about native medicine working better than church medicine, since they say that it doesn't heal true natives. However, I do want to say that both ways were done, as I was raised the traditional way. There was no way of getting rid of whatever this thing was. As we were told by the medicine lady, witchcraft is white man medicine. This is why we chose to do both ways, and it's healed my family just fine. We are native. Besides, she also said that we don't know where the evil originated from, so it was best to have both done, just to make sure that everything went back to normal. There is a little more to our story, and I'll save that for another time. I'm just happy my family is okay now, and safe. Back when I was young, I used to sleepwalk. My mom would tell me these stories about myself that I would have no memory about. She said it first started when I was around 5 or 6 years old. She had put me to bed one night. Then about an hour later, she heard a noise coming from down the hallway. She closed the book that she was reading and went to investigate. She told me that she found me sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to eat food. At first, she asked me what I was doing, and after not receiving a response, she got closer. She realized that I wasn't awake to respond. She stood there, and she just watched me for some time, as she hadn't actually seen a sleepwalker before. She said that I sat there acting as if I was eating. Then I would stop and turn the chair to my right. She said that to her, it appeared like I was having a conversation with someone, even though I wasn't saying any words, more like just slight whimpers and groans. I would then laugh quietly in my seat, and then continue eating. After about 20 minutes of this, I got up from my chair, took a few steps and laid down on the floor. My mother then woke me up and told me that I needed to go back up to bed. Even though I don't remember this interaction, she told me I was incredibly confused as I thought I was in bed. She led me by the hand back to my bedroom and tucked me back in. A few months later, this happened again. My mother had gotten up in the middle of the night to get something to drink. As she walked into the kitchen, she nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw a silhouette of someone standing in front of the window. She switched on the kitchen light and saw that it was me, standing in front of the glass, motionless. She walked over to me, asking what I was doing. Of course, when she got closer, she saw that my eyes were shut. Apparently, I stood at that window for nearly an hour before turning and walking back to my bedroom. My mom followed closely to make sure I went back to bed, and sure enough, I did. It was strange for me to hear about these things I was doing after I had fallen asleep. The concept that my body would move when I had no conscious control over it actually made me nervous. My mom found it somewhat amusing, but I didn't seem to think so. Over the following year, I only sleepwalked a few times. Most of them just ended up with me getting up from my bed and wandering into another room before falling asleep on the floor. My mother would find me the next morning and wake me up. After about a year had passed, my mother had gotten up one night, and while she was passing by my room, she decided to peek in on me. When she opened the door, I was nowhere to be found. She wandered around the entire house but couldn't find me anywhere. Then, as she was walking through the living room, something out of the corner of her eye caught her attention. She saw the outline of someone standing outside underneath one of the street lamps. As she turned to get a better look, she realized it was me. She threw open the door and dashed outside. I was apparently standing in the center of the road, all by myself. Lucky for all of us, our street was on a dead end, and didn't see too much traffic after 9 p.m. She called out my name as she ran towards me, but I didn't seem to react at all. As she got closer, she saw that I was moving my arms, as if I was having a conversation with someone. She walked up to me and grabbed my wrist. When she did this, I apparently began to freak out, shouting and fighting against her, as if she were some sort of beast attempting to devour me. A minute or two later, I had woken up and snapped out of my frenzy. When I came to, I asked my mom what I was doing. and she explained that I had sleepwalked outside. I apologized to her, and she led me back inside. The months that followed, I would sleepwalk almost every other night. It got so bad that my mom took me to a few mental health professionals. Each of them told my mom that sleepwalking is quite common in children, and that I should eventually grow out of it. They just gave her a list of things to be aware of if she finds me sleepwalking again, such as not waking me up in the middle of it. These explanations didn't really put my mother at ease. She wanted something a bit more concrete, so she kept searching until she came across the therapist who specialized in sleep disorders. It's such a bizarre part of my life that I barely remember it at all. The evidence I had that I used to sleepwalk all seemed to come from my mother telling me such. I apparently spoke with this doctor numerous times, and I would visit him at least twice a week for 3 months straight. Then one day, my mother stopped taking me to see him, and according to her, I hadn't had a sleepwalking episode since then. Nearly 15 years have passed since then, and it all just seemed more like a dream than a memory, as if it happened to somebody else, and I just heard about it. Of course, I believe my mom. I doubt she would make up something like that. It just never really clicked that I had this problem when I was younger. That was until I was helping my mom clean out some of her things out of her basement. She was going through all of her storage and was getting rid of a bunch of things. As I was putting out boxes, something clattered to the floor. It was a very thick manila file folder that hit the ground. Hoping that I didn't break anything important, I stopped what I was doing. After glancing at it, I noticed on the front that it had my name on it with some dates. I looked around to make sure my mom wasn't nearby, and I tucked the folder into the back of my pants. After finishing everything up, I told her I would talk to her later, and I headed back home to my house. When I got inside, I tossed my jacket on the couch and pulled out the folder. As I peeled open one end and slid the large file out, my eyes darted across the front of it. It was records of my time with the therapist. I guess he must have given my mother a copy of all this to keep. All the entries inside were each of the days I had gone to visit him. Most of them were just logs of the sessions, as well as a few notes he had taken throughout. One of the last entries drew my attention. It said that the therapist was going to conduct some type of hypnosis on me. Apparently it was some sort of therapy. He had me lay down on a chair and began telling me to relax while asking me questions. He asked me what I dreamed about. I told him that I dreamed of my friend. Reading this, I had no idea who I was talking about. The therapist then asked me to describe this friend of mine. I told him that he was much taller than me, but for a child, that wasn't saying too much. His body always seemed to be hunched over. He had long black hair that fell down to his shoulders. His arms were extremely long, like two snakes attached to the shoulders. Each of his fingers came to a point like sharpened knives. The therapist then asked me to tell him what his face looked like, and apparently, I struggled to describe it. I told him that his face was blurry, like it was covered in TV static. When the therapist continued asking me questions about my friend, apparently, I sat up in the chair, still asleep, and told the therapist to look at him for himself. I then pointed to behind the therapist, and when he turned, he saw nobody. He jotted down some notes and then asked me what my friend wanted. I told him that he wants to take me somewhere far away so that we can both play together. He then made another note. Then through a series of careful statements, he rid my mind of negative dreams. Well, that's what he wrote down anyway. Since that day, I have slept peacefully without any more sleepwalking incidents. All those memories I had from the early years of my life actually seemed blurry, and I had nearly forgotten about them all. Despite not knowing anything about those statements I made, I couldn't help but feel a little bit familiar with the description of this friend of mine. As I closed the file, I sighed, thinking about all the things I had said in those notes. I looked at the clock, which read 10:23 p.m. As I stood up from my chair, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. For the briefest of seconds, I thought I had saw someone standing outside. Someone tall, with long arms, with long black hair. Someone with a blurry face. I blinked my eyes, and when I opened them again, it was gone. I wanted to rationalize what I had just seen as a result of reading those files, that my tired mind had simply made me see this. But for some reason, I can't seem to shake this feeling that those weren't simply dreams. The dreams that I had been experiencing when I was a kid. I'm starting to think that there was something much more than dreams. Something much more sinister. I can feel my eyelids starting to become heavier by the minute. And for the first time in my life, I'm scared about what's gonna happen if I fall asleep again. It's been a long time.
My aunt told me the story. We're actually related by marriage, so she has a whole new set of Skinwalker stories that I would like to share with you. This story took place when she was a child. My aunt's family lived in a community about 20 miles south of Gallup, New Mexico. The area is far different from where I live. My house is surrounded by desert, and you don't really see trees until you move into the canyon. Bread Springs is a forested area, and it's where our story takes place. Like many people on the REZ, my aunt's family didn't have running water or electricity. In order to get some, they would have to drive into town and pull water back in large containers. The containers are huge and easily fit in the bed of a truck. Her family would place 2 containers on a long flatbed trailer to make the best of each trip. So her family went into Gallup, filled up the containers, and went around town doing other types of business. Back then, seatbelt laws weren't so strict, and so my aunt and her siblings sat in the bed of the truck as they went around town. It began to get dark, and so the family started going back home. Most roads weren't paved, and so they had to drive very carefully because of the trailer as well. The lights of town faded away in the distance, and soon the vehicle was surrounded by darkness. They drove, and the kids sat in the back and talked among themselves. However, that was until my aunt noticed something. There was a figure crouched by the furthest water container on the flat bed. The truck wasn't barreling down the road, but it was going at a speed that would be impossible for anyone to run and jump on. My aunt nudged her siblings, and they all paused to look at the dark figure. They all got silent and squinted their eyes to look. It was too dark to really make anything out, so they ignored her and continued to talk. My aunt kept her eye on the figure and pulled hard on the sleeve of her brother when this thing began to crawl over one of the water containers. The kids all stopped and watched in fear as the figure began to move carefully over the second container. My aunt said that the figure looked like a person. However, its limbs were abnormally long. With these long limbs, it was pulling its body closer to the kids. At this point, they began to scream and cry. They banged on the window of the truck. At this time, the creature was reaching for the tailgate of the truck. Due to the huge commotion that was now going on in the bed of the truck, the driver slammed on the brakes. The creature hit the tailgate and fell down in between the truck and the trailer. The driver rolled down the window and asked what was going on. The kids screamed at the driver to go. They weren't sure they were safe until they saw that the trailer moved up and down as if it ran over something large. When my aunt told me the story, I sat in disbelief. She told me she was uncomfortable when it was crawling on the trailer, but true fear rang through her body when she saw its eyes. I asked her what she meant. She said that they were like teddy bear eyes. I didn't quite understand what that meant until I pressed further. She said that its eyes were shiny. When you shine the light in the eyes of an animal, they reflect back. The brake lights were shining, and whatever they saw that night had eyes that were glowing back. I want to remain anonymous due to the nature of the story. See, I was in the Marines. I wasn't in any special forces or anything unique per se. I was just a regular rank and file Marine. I was stationed at the 29 Palms Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Training Center. I wasn't the only one who had seen or experienced things in the training grounds and surrounding areas. I was told to keep my mouth shut, but I'm gonna die soon anyways, so even if they do come for me, it's not gonna make a difference. It was early April, so the weather wasn't too bad. It wasn't hot during the day, and it wasn't cold at night. I always enjoyed doing field ops during that time of the year. I got away from all the dumb shit that we had to do day in and day out back on the main side, and I was always left to my own when I was out in the field. So late one night, me and a buddy of mine are doing fire watch for our section of the rest area. We had our rifles, helmets with our night vision goggles mounted on the front, and rifles with us. We also had 4 mags and live ammo. That night, an artillery group was doing night practice, so you'll hear the echo of the guns followed by the sound of the shells hitting the ground and exploding. Me and my friend were talking about just random crap when I flipped down my night vision goggles and saw movement out in the distance. At first, I thought it was just the green tint of the goggles fucking with my head, but then I saw it again. I tapped my buddy and asked if he was seeing this. He flipped down his night vision goggles too, and he nodded. "Yeah, but what is it? A coyote?" he asked. "No, man. It's too big to be a coyote. Besides, it looks like it's running around on 2 legs," I said back to him. That's when he tapped me and pointed out into the dark. "Hey, there's more than one, bro," he said. I looked to where he was pointing, and that's when I saw 4 or 5 other figures moving around in the dark. These things weren't that big. I would say maybe about 5'5", give or take. They also appeared to be very strong and built with massive arms and leg muscles. They were dark. They had big dark eyes and no nose to speak of. Their mouth was wide and filled with razor-sharp teeth. They walked around hunched over with their arms dangling by their sides. Their arms themselves were massive. They were running at crazy speeds, occasionally running on all 4s. They had 4 fingers on each hand, and the claws were long and sharp. It was like they had daggers for their nails. "Dude, I think they're getting closer." I nodded. "Yeah, I'm gonna go get the corporal up." He nodded, and I raced over to where our corporal was sleeping at and shook him awake. "There's something out there. You need to come take a look." He cursed under his breath and sat up. "This better be good," he said as he sat up. And then, that's when we heard gunfire. I raced back to my buddy who was shooting in the dark. I looked and I saw these creatures out in the dark, maybe 400 to 300 yards away, as other Marines had woken up to the sound of my buddy shooting. The officer in charge came running up asking what the fuck was going on. When we pointed to the creatures, he froze in place. About this time we heard tons of gunfire suddenly erupt from another unit who was conducting training as well. When I looked back at where these things were, they were no longer there. Instead, they were running on all 4s, directly at us. I raised my rifle and began to fire at them, as those with guns and ammo joined in, and the others who didn't ran back to get theirs. I lined up my sights with the closest one and began to fire into it. I saw chunks of its flesh get ripped off when I hit it, and it tumbled down. But without missing a beat, it regained its balance and kept running at us. At this point, I knew our rifles were useless, but I wasn't gonna leave my buddy. That's when I heard the officer in charge yelling for us to get back in the trucks and get the fuck out of there and get back to main site. Me and my friends turned and booked it for our 7-ton. I flipped on the battery switch and my buddy cranked the truck on. As we began to start moving, I looked out the window in time to see these things reach the camp. A Marine who hadn't realized what was going on until it was too late was impaled by one of the creature's claws and fell to the ground. I watched as he tried to crawl away, but this thing leaned over a bit on his upper torso and completely bit off his head with a single bite. As we began to get out of there, I saw a Humvee that had 3 of these things on racing towards it. The guy in the turret tried to flip the 50 cal around to unload into the creatures, but he wasn't fast enough, and one of these creatures ripped him out of where he was at and threw him to one of the others. He didn't have time to move before the thing sank its claws into his chest and began to devour him. I watched as the thing on top of the Humvee then jumped down into the hood and shattered the bullet-resistant front glass and pulled out the mangled corpse of the driver and run off into the desert with him. The remaining 3 Marines got out and made a run for our truck. I tapped my buddy to let them get on. However, they never made it. One by one, the things picked them all off and ran off with them, their screams fading into the desert. By the time we got back into the main road back to the main site and caught up with the rest of our unit, we noticed how active the night sky had become. There were helicopters everywhere with searchlights. We figured someone had called it, and they were trying to find the creatures, or the missing Marines. Well, what was left of them anyways. When we were next up at the checkpoint, I noticed something off about the guys manning it. They were wearing all black, and each one of them had a black ski mask over their face, and their night vision goggles down. They didn't have any patches, name tapes, or IDs with them. They were armed to the teeth though. One of their vehicles had a minigun mounted on it. They all carry high-power rifles with high-tech sights, laser sights, and other attachments on their rifles. When it was our turn, they had us step out of the truck and tell them what we saw. After we explained everything, the guy in charge looked at my friend and listed off his full name, date of birth, social security, where his mom and dad were, the name of his dog that he had when he was in middle school. He then looked at me and did the same thing. Once he was done, he looked at both of us. If you ever say a word of what actually happened here tonight, you and your families will disappear for good. Do you understand? We both nodded with our jaws on the floor. The guy had mentioned things that I had never told anyone about. They sent us on back to the main side of the base. I got out about a year after that, but I never went on another field op again. To this day, I still remember that night. When I go to bed each night, I just hope that whoever they were, they kill those things so no more Marines have to go out like that. In short, if you're ever stationed in 29 Palms, Cali, and you go on a field op, keep an eye out in the dark, and be sure you aren't too far away from a vehicle, and also pray that those things don't decide to turn you into a meal. I had been a hunter for most of my life. Leading up to this incident, the smell of the warm air and the beauty of nature always had me at ease. I never felt scared alone at night because I have seen everything there is to be scared of. I have seen bears the size of a small car and animals so vicious they would kill anything that moved. The one thing I was never scared of was deer. I heard the tales of the Skinwalker, the Wendigo, and pretty much anything in between. My uncle was an expert in tracking and hunting. We always went on trips together and would always come back with a fresh kill. He had something about him. It was a rule. I remember it because it was weird. He never wanted to go hunting in winter. I never asked why. I'm not sure, but something about it always had me on edge. One day, it was winter, and I was about to go deer hunting when my uncle stopped at my front door. When he came in, he saw my packed supplies and my rifle, and knew I was about to go hunting. He immediately burst into a wrath of anger as he dragged me to a wall and got into my face. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" His spit went all over my face as he looked at me crazy. He looked primal, as if he was fearful of something that he did not want to share. It was the same face you would expect a child to make if they were dumped in the middle of nowhere. The same face of fear that you see in people who have PTSD. I calmly brushed them off and got to the door saying I was gonna go hunting. I was not about to fight with my uncle and ruin this trip, as I hadn't gone hunting for close to a month. When you start hunting, you get adjusted to it, and then when you go on breaks, you actually miss it. As I got into my truck, my uncle peered at me out the window. He was there to take care of my house, but before I reversed, he left with the door open. My uncle is prone to outbursts, as I should mention. He's only ever done it a few times, and it's always in a situation where the reaction suits it. Not this one, however. What was so bad about hunting in the winter? The spot I had planned was an isolated one. It was a huge forest area, which I had not been to before. I obviously had mapped the area out and brought essential survival tools in case the worst came, but I never thought I would have to use it after all those years out in the forest. When I arrived, the crisp, cold air immediately saturated me in discomfort. I quickly got another layer of clothes on before I started to walk to where I would set up camp for the night. The clearing I had chosen was a pretty tight one. There was a big tree in the center that stood above the rest. It was called the Forest Star, which suited it. Around the clearing, the forest was extremely dense. Almost no sun shone through the top. There was a small hunting tower north of the entrance of the clearing, so it was a direct walk from camp. As I walked ahead, I noticed something. There were small droplets of blood littering the ground. My first thought was that it must have been an injured animal or something like that, but the droplets were small and almost even. I shook the thought out of my head and made it to my setup, and I started to pin my tent. When I was done, I checked my watch. It was around 5:30 p.m. I had around 2 hours for hunting before it was pitch black, and so I made it to the tower. When I undid my rifle from its case, I heard scampering. Shaking it off, I took my spot and waited. As I stood there, time almost slowed down. I was in a precise focus and was ready for anything. I wasn't ready for what I saw though. Out came 2 small bucks that seemed injured. There were small droplets of blood coming from their eyes. As I focused in, I saw that it wasn't dry blood. It was fresh, and it was oozing from their eyes. I was shocked. I had never seen anything like it. Many different scenarios ran through my head. I was thinking, had a hunter shot both of them in the eyes and managed to not kill them? But the scenarios I was coming up with seemed more unlikely than the last. I took aim at the closest one and shot it. It stood there for a second, just not moving. Then they trotted off as if nothing happened. Blood was running from the wound, so I know I had obviously hit it. But it didn't seem scared nor fazed. I decided that was enough and sort of jogged to my site. I was freaked out and decided that I would cook dinner and go to bed early. When I scampered around my pack, I pulled out a can of beans. I grabbed a pot and started a fire and began cooking them. As I cracked open a beer, the familiar sound of a branch snapping sounded off next to me. I thought it was maybe a small deer, and I brushed it off as I sat and relaxed. I was thinking about the deer, and I started to chalk it up to the fact I must have not hit it deep enough, and the deer must have been in shock. When I finished eating, I went to bed. I was shivering in the night cold and I could feel my body shaking uncontrollably. As I dozed off after a brutal 2 hours of cold, I heard another snap. This time, however, it was more loud, like a bear. I immediately grabbed my rifle and went out of my tent. My fire burned low, and in the distance I saw 2 red lights. I walked towards it when my mind started to race. Something felt wrong. As I closed the distance, my gut was literally twisted. My mind was anxious and I felt like I was about to break down. Then I realized what was wrong. Those weren't lights. They were 2 big solid red eyes. They were just orbs hovering. When I realized, I stood frozen. I thought it was a big cat, but what emerged was so much worse. Its fur was black, darker than the night around us. Its antlers were twisted and uneven, but the worst part, it was crying blood. Deep red droplets were pelting down in its unnatural eyes. I couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in fear. Then it started to make sounds. The sounds of a baby crying. It was horrible. The sounds of unnatural cries filled the cold air, making it worse. My body felt crumple, and so I finally broke out into a sprint. When I looked back, it stood there. It wasn't even breathing, but the sounds of that baby crying weren't fading. It was like a speaker was attached to my ear. When I made it back to camp, I rushed to pack my stuff. In a hurry, I ran, leaving the tent behind, and I rushed to my truck. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw that something was walking slowly towards me. That's when the whispering started. Terrible, faint voices echoed throughout the forest. As my mind started to close, I felt my cerebral melting, as anything I tried to do would not happen. It was like sleep paralysis. As I stood there, I found the strength to finally open the door and get in my car. I slammed the door shut, and that thing was right at the window. I started to sob as I jammed the keys in the ignition. My mind felt fried as I swerved out of there. I didn't care if I hit anything. I just wanted to be away from that thing. And then, before I could back out, it stood up on its legs, and it repeated a voice I recognized.
You did not escape. The forest are mine.
It was my grandpa's voice. He died when I was 6, and I never knew any of the details. The thing then made a terrible shrieking noise that hurt my entire body. As it did so, I heard scampering as more of those things came out. They had blood running from their eyes as well. The baby cry started again, and that's when I finally drove out of that fucking place. When I raced home, I barged into the door. My shoulder ached, but I didn't care. I shoved my door and locked it and ran into my kitchen. That's when I saw my uncle sitting at the table, enjoying a small glass of scotch. So, you saw what I saw, didn't you, Anthony? I couldn't form a single word. I was so shocked. My uncle came up to me and said, "What you saw out there is my rule that I abide by. There are things in those forests in winter that are so horrible that even the most seasoned can't handle it. I saw it when I was a boy, and since then, I will never go hunting during winter." I finally mustered a sentence. What was it? He took a small sip before sitting me down. "You saw something called Herberak. It's an old, ancient being that dwells in the forest during these winters. Hunters who see it never are the same again, but some never even come home. I was lucky. My uncle sort of sniffled as he told me about his encounter with Herberak when I was 23. My father and I went out into the woods on a very cold winter to hunt. Our family was struggling, so we didn't have much food. When we were hunting, my father called out to me, but before I could even get to him, I heard him yelled out before he fell silent. I never saw him again, but what stood there was worse than the loss of my own. A deer with red eyes, black fur, and twisted antlers stood there. Blood was running from its eyes. Then it started to cry like a baby. My uncle stopped and had to take a second before continuing. I comforted him as I was teary-eyed. It ran after me, Anthony, on 2 legs. It was like a human, and I rushed to get away from it. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a terrible red scar that ran across the entire underside of his arm. It was trying to feast on me. It knew I feared it, but eventually I managed to lose it. He finally finished his scotch before continuing. I was stuck in the forest for 3 days, fighting to survive. I heard its cries and whispers all around. As I tried to make it out, I finally arrived at a road and was taken in by the police. No trace was found of my father, except for one thing. They found blood at the scene and tested it. It belonged to my father. What was strange about it, it was mixed with his tears. Then my uncle finally stood up. Fear it, for it now knows who you are. Those were his last words. He left my house and the police found him wrapped up in a noose 2 days later. It broke me. My hunting buddy and best friend was gone. There was one detail about his suicide that was never resolved. He had droplets of blood coming from his eyes. The coroner's inspection said it was an aneurysm, but I'm not sure that is the truth. I'm 50 years old now, and I haven't been hunting in 2 decades. I can't even go into the forest anymore. I'm thinking about going back and seeing what Herberak is. Maybe I can kill him. So beware of Herberak, for he lurks in the forest, out in the cold.
Before I start, I want to give a little backstory, and also to apologize in advance for how long it's going to be, as it's my first time telling this. I'm full-blooded Navajo from the REZ in Arizona. I don't want to give the names of my family, just to avoid any attention on their side. Everything about it is true. And before you write me off as a Starbucks hipster wannabe, understand that this is my first time telling this. It may not be perfect, and if you're easily offended, I suggest that you don't listen. I'm sure you already know what a Skinwalker is. If you don't, I suggest that you do some research, because it would be simply too much to cover in this story. Now, as a Navajo myself, I would recommend reading and asking fellow natives about these topics, or simply looking online from credible native resources. How can a Skinwalker curse you? Notice how I said curse you. There's a reason why you never hear or know about Skinwalkers coming for you at night and eating you alive like some people believe, or simply killing you. Skinwalkers are full of deceit and trickery. They take satisfaction in seeing someone's life full of misery, especially when they themselves are the cause of it. I was cursed for years by a Skinwalker. I didn't know about it at first until I started putting the signs together and looked for help back from the elders in the REZ. Yes, I lived in the city when this happened. Now hear me out. Skinwalkers don't have to be near you, or you don't simply have to be in the REZ. Now ask yourself, why is that? Technically, keep in mind, before colonization, everything, everywhere, was the REZ. Anyways, I'll get to the story on how everything happened, but just bear with me. I gotta give some background on everything. We live in a small house in a little valley, about 15 miles outside of a small town called Sanders. They recently put a dollar store there, so I hear it's up and coming. Just a rinky-dink little gas stop town that isn't too much to look at. Anyways, we didn't have many neighbors, and they weren't like neighbors here in the city. The houses were spread far out, and we barely even communicated with anyone outside of our fence, other than the time when my brothers and sisters and I found a snake in our house, and we had to get it out, and also the few times that we asked to borrow a cup of sugar. There weren't that many other times that we asked our neighbors for anything. There were 5 of us, my 2 sisters and 2 brothers and me. I fell second oldest after my oldest sister. Our mom had become an EMT in Sanders, but despite it being really close, she was gone for days, 2 weeks at a time. We all had different dads. Our current one was our stepdad, but he was the father to our 2 youngest siblings. And, well, the guy was simply not a good person. He served in the army for some time before he met our mom, and actually had 2 other children with another woman before he left her. The rumor was that she caught him beating her babies and left them. I can't say much about when we first met him. I barely even remember. I do remember that he was a police officer, and his dad was in the tribal office. Aside from that, I also remember when everything started. Just a slap here and there for small things at first, followed by my mother, who would scream and yell at him about hurting us. She would tell us to pack our stuff, which we always did very happy, and tell us to get in the car. But it was always the same thing as she was about to go. It was always something that made her go back into the house. I forgot my hair dryer. I forgot this, and I forgot that. And so we would wait in the car for sometimes about 30 minutes, reassuring each other that she would come out. But she wouldn't. He would always kick open the door and scream at us to get back inside, kicking or hitting us as we walked by. I guess I should give some props to my mom. She tries sometimes. There was this one time when we drove about a mile away from my grandma's house. We could see her house, and if we wanted to, we could actually walk there. But I think her pride didn't let her go and ask her parents for help. On that day, we spent the night in the car. There were 2 other times when she drove us about 2.5 hours out to Flagstaff to stay in a shelter for women and children. I remember there was the coolest little play area in there for kids. But after a few days, we would make that horrible drive back to his house, where things would pick up right where they left off. I don't blame my mom. She was dealt with some rough hands, 4 kids and no place to go. After one big fight, something in our mom snapped. Before she told us to pack, we started packing. But something was different. She yelled at us to come inside the living room. We all went in there, and my older sister was holding our baby brother. I was holding my little brother Kyle's hand, and then she screamed at our stepdad. You know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna say his name, mostly because I hate referring to him as Dad in any context. His name was Jimmy, and she said to him, "Is this what you want me to do to my kids?" She grabbed my little brother and yanked him away from me and kicked him. He fell on the floor and crawled behind the fireplace. My sister set my youngest brother, who was just a baby, down to help my other brother, and before she could get there, our mom grabbed her by the hair and threw her across the room. She hit the wall by our front door, and then she grabbed me and started hitting me. She started to reach for my baby brother when my oldest sister ran over to her crying. and covering him with her body. And Jimmy was just sitting there, watching as our mom worked away. After that day, it was really hard to imagine that she could keep us safe anymore, and she didn't, and it got worse. From throwing us out in the winter nights with no clothes on, whipping us with a fishing pole rod, beating us with his hands, wires, and the infamous green belt. We got everything, and it was rough. It was only after he broke a couple of my brother's bones when CPS started noticing. But before the interviews, Jimmy always got a chance to talk to us. We had a gate outside our house that had to be manually opened in order for anyone to get in. They would come in a white van. I still remember what it said on the side: Navajo Nation Social Services. Our stepdad would pull us aside as my mom walked out to greet, and I think she would do it to buy time. But who knows? He would always say the same thing: if you tell anyone, they're gonna separate you, and you'll never be able to see each other again. And if you tell anyone, I'll kill you. So of course, as kids, we never said anything. One day, in 3rd grade I believe, he had to take me to school because I couldn't miss any more days, or I would be kicked out. I can't remember why, but he beat me in the car outside of school. And when he opened the door to let me out, he said, "Tell them that you fell." I walked inside and I remember there being a movie playing, so the lights were off, and a heavy TV on one of those black rolly things was in the front of the room. I crawled into my chair and put my head on the desk. That's when I felt somebody touch my shoulder, and I jumped thinking it was him, but it was actually my teacher, Mrs. Grant. She asked me to come outside with her, so I followed her. When she saw my face, I remember she started to cry. I was like, crap, she's crying, and she hugged me. I felt so bad for her, so I hugged her back. And then she asked me, "Who did this to you?" I fell. "Don't lie to me. Tell me who did it." And for some reason, I told her. My dad. She asked why, and I won't ever forget what I told her. Because I deserved it. What she told me next kind of set in stone everything that I had been feeling. No one deserves this. She took me to the nurse and showed me my face. Right there on the entire left side of my face was a perfect handprint. They let me sleep in the nurse's office after they got pictures of my body and bruises. It was embarrassing. And the day passed. When the weekend came, a white van pulled up outside the gate. Of course, it was social services coming to do another interview. We went through the same speech as always. A lady asked me questions. "Did your dad do this to you?" "No." "Your teacher told us you said your dad did this to you." "No." I lied to her. I did often wonder if they knew they were making things worse, not better. But I guess I was too young to know that these were the people that could actually save us. Maybe. It was embarrassing. I imagine the reason CPS never came back after that day was because it was hard to believe that two people that were a cop and also an EMT, who are people that save lives, could ever do this to their own children. To clarify, you might be wondering where the rest of our family was at, such as my grandparents. The truth is there were so many fights at their house. At the time, everyone lived with my grandparents still. It always ended the same way. Our mom would bring Jimmy over to their house. My uncles and aunts would try to hide us, but they would always find us and take us away. Soon, we just never saw them anymore. And when we did, they didn't want to be around when Jimmy was there. And I don't blame them. Anyways, that was life for the next 13 years. That's all we knew. Our parents were always beating us, and our mom started to be gone for weeks at a time, leaving us at home more often with that guy. My older sister ran away when she turned 18. Verbal, sexual, and physical abuse was all in our house after all that time. When I was 15, I started working at the Grand Canyon. Then, suddenly, I was 18. I got a scholarship to go to school in Denver, I was super excited, but it meant that I was going to have to leave my younger siblings there. By this point, we were all waiting to follow in our sister's footsteps and run the second that we turned 18. I'll be honest, I felt horrible about it because we were all we had. It sounds horrible and the abuse portion of my life seemed like it was never ending, but I had my siblings there and it made it easier. Faced with the thoughts of leaving, I felt that I had to show them that we can get out. We can have a life far from this one and be educated and be happy. So that's what I did. I told my mom this when she was driving. I told her that I had a scholarship to go to school in Denver, and she flipped her shit. She pulled over as we were in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, close to Window Rock, and she started slapping me and screaming that I was gonna run away too. After a few days of giving me the quiet treatment, she said I could go, on the grounds that I never ask her for help again. I kept tabs on the kids while I was gone. I got updates from them, and after 2 years I got my degree. When my second younger brother turned 18, he ran away to my sister's place in St. John's, leaving Jimmy's biological children, my youngest brother and sister, there. My weekly phone calls home consisted of asking my youngest brother if he was hurting them. My youngest brother was the most honest of all of us. He never lied, and when he did, he was horrible at it. So I knew if I asked him over the phone, I would get an honest answer. He told me over the weeks about all the physical abuse and how it got worse. During my Christmas break in '09, when I was 19, my older sister set up a plan to get them out. When we were kids, our parents always told us, if you think you can find someone who can do a better job, then you can live with them. I mean, we had practically been raising the kids already. Now that we're grown, we figured why not give it a shot. I came home and it was actually snowing that day. I know, in the desert. I saw it as an omen, but we ignored it and decided to go with it anyway. But the plan failed. Horribly. So fucking horribly. There was a big fight. I called my mom a cunt. She jumped on me. My sister jumped on her. And my stepdad jumped on my sister. It was crazy. And all of this only got us a restraining order. It sucked. And I get there was a better way to go about it. It is what it is. It happened. The day after the school year ended and I got the email that I received my degree, I was happy. I was getting ready for work when I got a phone call from my older sister. Something bad happened. Something real bad. Tell me. And my sister said, he's dead. They found him dead. I just got the call from Mom. After explaining that she was driving over to Middle Wells from St. John's to see what was happening, she hung up. My stepfather died. I was upset. I was mad. I'm not sure why, but I was angrier than I had ever been in my life. I felt like he had gotten off too easily. I wanted to go back someday and rub it in his face. Like, you see me, I became something great without your fucking help. After throwing a fit, I calmed down and picked up my bag. Most likely a heart attack, I thought. I got another call on my way driving to work. It was my sister again. Hey, this is real bad. She sounded really sad. What's going on? I asked. They think that he did it. Our youngest brother. Our stepdad used to be a guy that would get in our face during a beating. He wanted you to stand right in front of him. He would point at the space right in front of his feet and say, stand right there and don't you fucking move. He would fake to hit us, and if you flinch, he would beat you and tell you to stand in front of him again, repeating the process until you took a hit without flinching. After he did this, he would bring his face right in front of us, and he would tell us, are you gonna fucking do something about it? If you think you're strong enough, I dare you to do something about it. And he would go on and on. In my mind, this is exactly how it went down between him and my younger brother. All I know was that he was shot twice in the head while he was sleeping, with one of his many guns that he used to spend hours of the day cleaning. Jamie and our mom got in a big fight one day, and she kicked him out of her room. He started sleeping in the living room, on the floor in his Green Army sleeping bag, for the last 8 years. When I got to the house the next morning, there was a lot of people surrounding it. My mom was sitting outside in the dirt. Her face looked white and sickly. I felt bad for her, but I ran to my youngest sister and held her for a while. Her arms were cold, and she was confused. I asked the police officers, "Why don't you have her cover? She is just a kid." I was angry. They quietly told me they were sorry, and that I could go inside and get her a jacket if I wanted to. I walked quickly inside, and the feeling that washed over me was scary. It was sudden, cold, and I felt a little panicked. I looked over to where he slept, and there were people cutting out a large piece of the carpet that was stained a dark maroon color, and they started stuffing it into a large black bag. There were other bags too. In one of them I saw his green sleeping bag, sticking out with the same red on it. I felt sick and ran into the room that I shared with my brothers and sisters. I snagged her jacket and hurried out the door. I was the only one from the family to go inside the house that day. I was shaken, but I still had to be strong for my kid sister. Our brother had been taken away to Flagstaff about 2.5 hours away to be locked up. They later found that he acted in self-defense, and with some evidence, the entire trial was kept quiet, even to the family. There was a lot of heat that came from our stepdad's side of the family. They all wanted answers and no one was saying anything. We weren't even allowed to be at his funeral. A couple of months passed and I was back in Denver. My brother was in a halfway house. They didn't charge him as an adult, and my younger sister and mother moved out of the home to a place up in the mountains. Things seemed like they were starting to calm down. It was maybe a little after midnight when I got home. I had just gotten off a double shift from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. and I was very tired. I had just moved into a new apartment with my best friend Adrian. We both worked in the same job, and with our schedules we barely even saw each other. A lot of my stuff hadn't been moved over from my old place yet. I had only brought my mattress, a lamp, and my cat, who I named Eddie. I got home from work, kicked off my non-slip shoes, peeled off my jacket and just passed out. It was only 2 hours after I fell asleep when I heard something. I opened my eyes and I could see my room door, but underneath the door, I saw the light on. There was a sound, a low growling, and I sat up. I saw my cat Eddie in the corner of the room opposite of me. His tail was poofed out like a mini Christmas tree, and he wedged himself as far into the corner as he could. His head was low as he growled and hissed. I was still shaking off the sleepiness when I asked him what was wrong. Then, I'm not kidding, my door started shaking. I looked at the door thinking it was my friend Adrian, just getting off of work. I grabbed my phone and looked at it. It was almost 3. "Dude, fucking knock," I said loud enough that I hope he heard me, but I was still weirded out by my cat. He never acted like this, and the door just kept shaking. I was sitting up on my mattress, so I stood to my feet, thinking that my roommate had come home and wanted to get some early breakfast again. I walked to the door and I looked back at Eddie, wondering what was wrong with him, and getting slightly annoyed at Adrian for shaking the damn door. "Dude," I said, "fucking knock," I said, angry as I flung open the door. There was no one there. That's when I got fucking paranoid. My roommate was like me. He slept with his door closed, and he would even lock his door. I looked down the hall, and his door was wide open, and his room was fucking dark. I still had my phone in my hand when I pulled up his number and called him. "Hey, what's up?" "Hey dude, where the fuck are you?" "I'm still at work. I'll be off in a couple of hours if you want to go grab something for breakfast." I hung up the phone and said, "Fuck this." I grabbed my cat and ran outside. I sat watching the door of my apartment. We lived on the 2nd floor, with the entrance of the garage right under our balcony, so it was really like living on the 3rd floor. I watched the door. There was a little sit-down place where people could walk their dogs, and from there, I could see my place pretty well. I sat there debating on whether or not I should call the police. It was when the sky started to change colors, when I got the courage to walk back inside. I did call Adrian just to tell him what was going on, just in case. I walked into my apartment and replayed the incident in my mind. I checked the balcony. It was still locked from the night before. The 2 windows in the apartment were both firmly shut. I sat in our living room trying to work out what just happened, but I couldn't come up with an explanation. I wrote it off and tried to put it behind me, but that day I kept thinking about it. I remember seeing the lights under the door, but no shadow of a person on the other side. It was just too fucking weird. During this time I put it behind me and just focused on work. When the night drew near, I started to get anxious. Next thing I knew, I was back in my room, fidgeting, and for some reason, I was fucking scared to go to sleep. Adrian was working that night, but I told him what was happening. A few small things happened in my room before this incident, so it wasn't too crazy for him to believe. He just joked that my room was haunted, but that didn't really ease my jitters. I guess my best friend is an asshole. What can I say? But that night, I experienced something scarier than the night before. I was laying in bed when I had this sensation that someone opened up my room door. My back was to the door, and I felt like someone was in the room with me. It was the scariest feeling ever. My eyes couldn't open, and my body couldn't move. And I remember thinking, it's him. Jimmy is here. He's here to fucking hurt me. Memories of those nights when he snuck into my older sister's room made me feel like I was gonna die. I tried to will my body to move, or my mouth to open and scream, but all I was able to do was a small gurgle, and my body stayed stiff. I finally snapped out of it and started fucking screaming. I scrambled for my small lamp and turned it on. The little light sent off a little bit of light, but it was enough. My cat Eddie was there with me. When I started crying and tried to catch my breath, I hadn't been breathing the entire time. I told myself, calm down, you're okay. He's not here. He's dead, and he cannot hurt you, or anyone. I told myself this after every time it happened, which was damn fucking near every night. Most times, I could feel it coming on hours before I even went to bed. I changed my sleeping habits. I stayed awake all night thinking it wouldn't happen during the day. Or if I slept on the couch, maybe it wouldn't happen. But it still did. I worked all day, and soon I was a certified insomniac with sleep paralysis. Almost 2 years passed like this, and I'm not kidding. I was living in a nightmare. I couldn't wake up from it, and it was anxious and stressful. Think about living your childhood trauma all over again, every single night, in your dreams. In 2010, my cousin was graduating high school. I wanted to go back to show her support, so I made a trip back to the REZ. The night of the graduation, I had all my younger cousins around me, and they wanted to hear a scary story. I told them I didn't have any, but they begged and begged, and so I finally told them what was happening to me. When I was done, they were scared, but a voice from behind me said something and made us jump. It was my aunt. Come outside with me. I want to talk to you. I followed her thinking I was going to get chewed out for scaring her daughters. When we got outside, she pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and pulled it in a long drag. When the cloud of smoke hit the air, she told me to sit down. I did, and she said, "That story you told, is it really happening?" I nodded, and I told her it's been happening for about 2 years now. She took another drag, then told me that she knew what I was going through, and that it was happening to my older sister too. I was surprised. My sister hadn't mentioned anything to me. These things that are going on with you, You need help. And I think that's why you came back. We all stayed the night at my aunt's itty bitty trailer, and we all claimed the living room to sleep in. I had my 2 youngest cousins next to me on the floor, my other cousins on one couch, my aunt on the other couch, and one of my cousin's boyfriends on the other side of the couch. Everyone was having no problem sleeping, but I was on the floor looking up at the ceiling. All the shadows in the room were freaking me out, and I was getting super paranoid. Finally, I figured if I washed my face I could calm down a bit. I stood up and started walking to the hallway, and about died when I ran smack into my grandpa. His hair was a jet black mess. I always thought his hair was always black, but later found out that my grandma dyed it for him. He looked very surprised as I was. "Why aren't you asleep?" I didn't know how to tell him that I was afraid and that I couldn't sleep, so I just asked, "Grandpa, I need help. Can you pray for me?" All he said was, "What?" He wasn't wearing his hearing aid. "Can you pray for me?" I asked a little bit louder with a smile, because my grandpa is silly. Yeah," he said, and he motioned for me to follow him into my cousin's room, where he was staying the night. We sat down on her bed. He had brought his box with him to bless my cousin earlier that day. Inside were his eagle feather fans, and other things like cedar, corn pollen, a small crystal, and paper and mountain smoke and other knickknacks. My grandpa speaks mostly Navajo and prays only in Navajo. When he started, I felt a little at ease. He was less than 30 seconds in when there was a loud bang outside my cousin's room window. My grandpa jumped and looked at me. I was scared, and he continued with the prayer. There was another loud banging noise followed by what sounded like someone running away from the house. I was freaked out, and judging by the look on my grandpa's face, it wasn't something new to him, and I knew it wasn't. Maybe in later stories I'll share what I'm talking about. After finishing his prayer, he told me to sleep. That night, nothing happened, but when I woke up, all my cousins were gone, and the sun was shining brightly outside. They all went to the canyon without me. I heard my grandma and my aunts talking. I sat up and my grandpa had a cup of coffee, and they were all sitting at the kitchen table. They stopped talking when they saw me sit up. "Hey, come here." I stood up and walked over to all the elders. "Grandpa told us what happened last night," my grandma said, her hands folded around her cup. "How long has this been going on?" I explained to him the first time and how it's happened since then. I told him I saw a doctor and he prescribed me medication, and with that comment my grandma laughed. "We handle it differently. We think you've been cursed. Grandpa heard a Yenadroshi outside last night during your prayer, and we want to help. You need to come home with us to see Ninja Turtle." My medicine man and I have a history together. When I was a kid, I was almost killed by an asthma attack and spent a good portion of my early life in and out of hospitals. Finally, my mom brought me to him to get the traditional treatment. The first time I saw him, he was outside his hogan, and I was fresh outside of the hospital already sick. Close to 5 years of age at that time. He smiled at me, and I called him Ninja Turtle because he wore a bandana on his forehead, and I was a huge fan of the Ninja Turtles. He had been treating me in the traditional Navajo ceremony way for years before we moved into Jimmy's house. Then, I never saw him again. "You need to come home with us to see Ninja Turtle." The thought of seeing him again, being much older, I was raised to follow our traditions and customs, but now that I was much older and living in the city, the idea seemed crazy to me. I was cursed. A skinwalker following me in the city? I need to see a medicine man. It sounded so surreal, but at this point, I was willing to try anything. I told my aunt that I was going to go back with them. A 2.5-hour drive back across I-40, and I was at my hometown. I made the drive with my cousins, my aunt, and my grandpa. That afternoon, we met Ninja Turtle. He was the same as I remember him, just a little bit shorter. He asked me lots of questions while eating his bread and his stew. His wife sat in their living room. They live without modern needs. No TV, nothing. Just a tiny table where they eat their meals, and a bed and a loom for her rug making. He told my aunt, my grandma, and I to come back before the sunset the next day, and he was going to get everything ready, explaining the things that we needed to bring for him. On the way over, I noticed my grandma fidgeting. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that this was big, and that it was something she had never seen him do before, which is big itself, because my grandma had been seeing him for many years. There was talk that he might need to perform a sand painting ceremony that can actually last for about 4 days straight if it was serious enough. I was worried about what might happen, but we got there before the night came, armed with the few things he asked me to bring. He performed an enemy way ceremony for me. Because of the sacredness of the ceremony, I can't say what happened in there. I know that after the feeling I got during the final blessing, I was out in the middle of the desert with Ninja Turtle by my side. My body was covered in ashes from the fireplace, a moon high above us in the still desert. My spirit and my mind finally felt like they were at peace. He later told me it was the spirit of my stepfather that was causing everything, but now he had let go of me. The details of the nightmares and what happened to me are still fresh in my memory, but I can honestly say I'm happy now. And after that night, I've been sleeping well. An update on my life. I met someone and we got married. We had a traditional Navajo ceremony. My grandma passed away 4 days after our marriage. We had a baby boy and another baby on the way. On some nights, it's very rare, but I'll get a panic feeling, but never the nightmares. I think it might just be fear. My siblings are all doing fine. My kid brother wants to join the Marines. He just got off probation. My younger sister is still living with our mom, and sadly, doesn't want to see us. But my 2 other siblings are doing good. We are just living our lives. I haven't been back to our old home, or even where Jimmy was buried. I doubt anyone is living there, but who knows. I actually ran into my 3rd grade teacher. I hugged her, and she remembered me. Let me expand on the original story, as I'm getting a lot of questions about everything that happened. Well, it took me a while for me to get to the point of being happy like I am now. And yes, that's a constant saying my older sister and I say to the kids as well. Breaking the cycle. If anything, our parents taught us what not to do, and out of everything, we all were close and stuck by each other. It was tough, and while we dealt with the abuse, we had loads of fun times on our own. There were good times as well. The bad just outweighed everything. We were just trying to be good people no matter the situation. So, I mentioned that they didn't allow us to go to his burial. Well, not in the traditional way. My mom had buried some of his bloody clothes around our land. That was a big no-no. Sometimes, when spirits are upset about being disrespected or not having a proper burial, they can latch on to those around him. This is what the medicine man said it was, and because of a restless spirit, he latched on to me and my sister. My younger siblings weren't affected because right after they did a cleansing, where you walk around a fire or burning cedar, and leave whatever is there. We had to leave early, so that's when he latched, apparently. And yeah, my sister got treated early on, and because it was early on, it wasn't as bad as my experience was. Mine was festering for 2 years, and it got stronger because these things build off your fears. This is why older Navajos say to chase things off if you ever come across them. Anyways, my sister also lived on the REZ, as I was living about a day's drive away. She still won't tell me about the things that she experienced, but there were things going on around my apartment that were unexplained. Lights going on and off when I was the only one in the room. I once came home and my roommate was talking to my door. From our front door you could see my room door. So I walked in one day and I heard him say, "Well, fine." I was like, "Who are you talking to?" He jumped and saw me, then walked into my room. I was like, "What are you doing?" And he swore that he was just talking to me. Just stuff like that. Seeing stuff at the corner of my eyes. And of course, the nightmares. As far as one of the main questions that I'm getting, well, when a person is cursed, sometimes there is something evil that follows them. Most of the time it takes a form in a skinwalker. We just don't really talk about them because it's taboo. Oftentimes the skinwalker will latch onto you until harm comes to you. I almost been hit by cars, got into an accident, and witnessed Navajo omens in the middle of the city. Like seeing coyotes walk right in front of me, seeing some owls, stuff like that. It wasn't too unbelievable that a skinwalker was following me. I just always assumed it was stuff that happened only on the REZ. And I never mentioned it to my family because I didn't want them to worry. I mean, they already had enough to deal with. Like for example, I saw Ninja Turtle find out things without any mention. I did tell him what I thought was bothering me, but there have been many times. Like my aunt, for instance, she once had someone curse her and her boyfriend. They ended up calling Ninja Turtle when she got into a car accident, and her man went literally crazy. He claimed that his dead best friend was following him, dragging chains and trying to get into his home at night. It had just snowed when they had their accident, and Ninja Turtle walked out into the snow with my aunt and told her to dig into a specific spot. Inside the hole she dug was a bone with her hair wrapped around it, and a piece of her boyfriend's clothes. So taking that into account, and all the other times he's come to help, maybe in another video I'll tell you all about how skinwalkers use these items to put a curse on you.
My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear, and each star twinkle in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, I lived outside a reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on a 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside with good dirt for growing thorn brush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek and some old abandoned farmsteads. Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember it so much. The engine began to sputter, and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "Damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road. As it coasted to a stop, my Pa said, "Stay here, son," and he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool down the engine, and that's when I smelled it. rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up the smell of one of those dead bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too. The back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get very hot. The wind stopped blowing, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called out. No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest. I tell you, I never felt fear like this. Not until Vietnam. Not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa's door and saw a shadow bound across the road through both dim beams of light across the partly open hood. Grandfather paused telling the story. He spit a fat piece of tobacco to his side, and he looked very pensive into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and gasped for air. The night was breezy, but I was sweating and clammy. "What about your father? What did you see?" My grandfather, continuing the story, sighed. "A creature." He shook his head. "You have to understand, there were legends. Old legends. Much older than what's out there in the valley. Older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old chiefs and their shamans, the Apache and Hopi and Cherokee, and all them old tribes and First Peoples. They told tales. They told stories about dark magic. Something about a deal made with the old spirits of blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white man that came for their land and women. They called them." He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and looked towards the fire, to the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and then leaned a little bit and said, "They would call them Skinwalkers, old warriors, resurrected as skinless men, walking on deer legs with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote, but they were messed up, long and disfigured, teeth like a Bowie knife, long arms, and standing 7 feet tall, even hunched over. They would gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'll run through the bullets, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. And boy, could they change their voice to match a person you knew or might know. And that's what I saw, big and fast. Only for a second, it ran across the road, gray and molted, muscle flexing under its legs, clumping on the road, stringy muscle hunched shoulders. And it turned, looked right into the cab, and looked at me, right into my eyes. And I swear, it grinned at me. I sank into my seat. In fear, shaking, I knew my death was coming. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens, charged and full with power. I yelled for Pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I started to shake as my grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I knew he lived. But the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of Skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin that they were wearing would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them, even though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting up my hands to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my father said. Before climbing into the cab, he got the steering wheel and pulled himself in an awkward way, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. Your great-grandfather was a good man. Treated me and my mom right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed all those camps. And now, I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run? Or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your mom, as he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out into the road. And our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? I knew, because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I saw that same beast running 50 miles an hour right next to our car, looking at me with those yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us. My pa kept his eyes on the road, looking straight ahead. "Son," he said, "don't look at it." That's how I knew it was my dad. He knew what to do, and he kept telling me to just keep looking straight ahead and to not look at whatever was around us, running. He then told me that by acknowledging its presence, you give it power. That's where my grandfather finished the story. I kept staring at him, but by this time, he was just looking straight ahead, looking around me, and said we should go inside. As we went inside the house, he then told me to not ever mention Skinwalkers. He also said that speaking their name out loud or mentioning them at all, even in text, even in stories, even if someone else is telling you a story, is supposed to make them aware of your existence.